Chapter 6. The Blood Bond. It was through Mina that my fate was sealed. Until then, I had treated the mortals who opposed me as one treats gnats, annoyances to be brushed aside with a sweep of the hand. But Mina was no gnat. She was a flame, and like a moth drawn too near, I found my wings seared even as I yearned for her warmth. The night I claimed her fully, I recall with an ache that is both triumph and wound. She lay restless in her chamber, the cross pressed in trembling hands, the whispers of her companions echoing faintly beyond the door. They thought their prayers and symbols sufficient, but walls cannot keep out the mist, and faith, though strong, is still human. I entered as vapor, as shadow as silence itself, reforming before her eyes only when she dared to blink. She gasped, not wholly from terror. No, there was something else in her voice, a tremor that bespoke recognition, as though some part of her soul had awaited me long before that hour. I bent to her throat, and with the gentlest of touches, pierced her skin. Warmth surged upon my lips, a tide of life flowing into me, richer than any vintage. How many centuries had passed since I last drank with such rapture? Her blood was not mere sustenance, it was song, it was memory, it was hope itself transmuted into flesh. Each pulse carried with it not only vitality, but the essence of who she was, her loyalty, her sorrow, her fierce devotion to those she loved. To drink of Mina was to drink of purity, and in that purity I felt myself both nourished and condemned. Yet I did not stop with feeding. I pressed her to drink of me, to partake of the eternal night that courses through my veins. She resisted, her lips trembling, but I held her fast. My blood touched her tongue, and in that instant a bond was forged more binding than any vow. She shuddered, her soul recoiling, yet part of her yielded. I felt it, as keenly as a blade entering flesh, the moment her spirit bent beneath mine. It was not victory alone, it was possession, communion, marriage of the darkest kind. From that hour, I could touch her thoughts as though they were whispers carried on the wind. I knew her fears, her dreams, her desperate prayers. She, in turn, felt my presence in every waking moment, a shadow behind her gaze. No matter what protection her friends sought to cast about her, I remained within her blood, within her very being. They cursed me as tyrant and corrupter, and in truth they were not wrong. Yet I did not see corruption. I saw salvation of a kind, for I longed to raise her from the fragile fate of mortals into the eternal dominion of my night. Was it love, or was it selfish hunger disguised as devotion? Even now I do not know. Perhaps both. Her companions soon discerned what had been done. Their outrage burned hotter than any flame, yet their fury did not undo the bond. Indeed, their wrath only deepened Mina's torment, for she stood divided, bound by love to them, bound by blood to me. I watched her from afar as she wept, her heart tearing in two, her prayers mingling with the echo of my whispers. Some nights she resisted, clutching the crucifix until her skin blistered. Others she yielded, her dreams opening to me like flowers under moonlight. For me, the bond was both shield and snare. Through her, I could see the movements of my hunters, for her eyes became windows into their councils. When they gathered to speak of my destruction, I heard their voices as though I stood among them. Their maps, their plans, their desperate hopes, all were unveiled to me through Mina's unwilling gift. I laughed in secret, delighting that their chosen purity was the very spy I had planted within their midst. And yet, with each vision came also her sorrow, her pain. Her tears stained my triumph. For centuries I had fed without conscience, taking lives as one plucks fruit from a tree. But Mina's anguish lingered within me, soft as a wound that will not close. I felt her shame, her horror at what I had made of her. Her voice cried within me, even as I exulted, and I found no peace. It was as though I had chained myself as well, shackling my spirit to hers in a bond as poisonous as it was intoxicating. The hunters, ever resourceful, sought to use the bond against me. Van Helsing, cunning as the serpent, bade Mina speak aloud her visions, forcing her to recount the shadows and stirrings I planted. In doing so, they turned my own connection into a path by which they might track me. I cursed their ingenuity, yet I could not sever the link without undoing the very essence of what I had claimed. So I remained, half in triumph, half in peril, bound to the woman who was both my prize and my undoing. Do you understand the irony? I, who had prided myself on patience, who had outlasted empires, was undone by desire. In seeking companionship, I had forged the chain that would drag me toward ruin. I had tasted of purity, and in so doing, revealed my corruption more nakedly than ever. Mina was mine, yes, but in being mine, she became my mirror, and what I saw reflected there was monstrous. Still, I did not relent. Love, hunger, call it what you will, drove me to cling to her even as my foes closed in. I told myself that if I could carry her back to my homeland, away from these meddling men, I could remake her in peace, crown her as queen and knight beside me. It was a dream, foolish and fevered, yet it sustained me. For even monsters dream, though their dreams are born of shadows. Thus did Mina become the battlefield on which the last acts of my struggle would play. Through her veins ran both my triumph and my doom. Through her lips came both my secrets and my betrayals. And through her soul I would come to know, at last, the cost of what I had chosen so long ago, to live forever and to love no more. Chapter 7. The Pursuit. Once, I believed myself the master of every hunt. For centuries I had stalked mortals across forests, cities and battlefields. They fled, they wept, they prayed, and I came to them as doom incarnate. Never did I imagine that I, Count Dracula, would one day find myself hunted like a beast. Yet so it was. When the bond I forged with Mina turned against me, my enemies grew bold. Through her lips they learnt my secrets. Through her visions they discerned my paths. What once had been my greatest triumph became my snare, and I felt the circle of their pursuit tightening around me. I cursed Van Helsing and his companions, yet I cursed myself more bitterly still, for had I not, in my arrogance, delivered them the very weapon by which they struck at me, I resolved then to flee England. London, which had promised to be my new dominion, had soured into a trap. Too many eyes watched me. Too many holy hands profaned the very soil I had prepared. My coffins, once safe havens, had been unearthed and defiled. The earth from my homeland, sanctified by their accursed rituals, could no longer cradle me. So I turned my thoughts eastward to Transylvania, to the castle where the first shadows of my damnation had taken root. There, in the cradle of my power, I might yet restore myself, or at the very least make my stand. The journey was perilous, though not for lack of cunning. I employed every artifice of misdirection, false trails, hired servants who knew nothing of their master's true nature, vessels that bore my crates beneath tarpaulins and chains. By sea, by river, by rail I moved, a phantom cargo slipping ever eastward. Yet at every step I felt the breath of my pursuers hot upon my neck. They were tireless, spurred by faith and love, those twin engines I had once despised. but now found formidable. It was through Mina that I felt the most keenly. Bound by my blood, she travelled in their company, a reluctant spy whose soul recoiled from her task. Through her eyes I glimpsed their maps spread upon tables, their whispers over candlelight, their prayers muttered into the night. At times I sought to twist her visions, to cloak my path in illusions, but Van Helsing's faith was a shield too stubborn to pierce. And always Mina resisted, straining against the bond, clinging to her humanity with a ferocity that both wounded and awed me. The chase quickened as we neared the continent. They pursued me across storm-lashed waters, where the sea itself seemed to conspire against my passage. I sent tempests upon them, called forth fog and gale to shatter their resolve, yet still they pressed on. Wolves I loosed upon their tracks when they set foot on land, but the beasts faltered before the crucifix held high, retreating with howls of fear. It was as though nature itself had chosen sides, and the side was not mine. Each mile eastward my strength grew, for I drew nearer to the soil of my birth. Yet each mile also tightened the noose, for my hunters knew where I must return. There could be no deception in this endgame. All paths led back to my castle, that ancient fortress of stone and shadow, where I had first welcomed Jonathan Harker, and where fate now decreed the last act must be played. I confess, there were moments on that flight when doubt gnawed at me as never before. I, who had defied death itself, felt the chill of mortality creeping once more upon my flesh. Each dawn found me weaker, for my coffins had been desecrated, and I could rest only fitfully, hidden like a fugitive, rather than enthroned like a lord. Each dusk brought renewed pursuit, the hunters gaining ground with every turn of the wheel. Their determination was a blade at my throat, and though I mocked them aloud, within me stirred a fear I had thought long buried. Yet pride is a cruel companion, and I would not relinquish it. Even as I fled, I told myself I guided them, that I drew them where I wished, that in Transylvania I would crush them as the falcon crushes the sparrow. I envisioned their despair upon the cliffs of my homeland, when they beheld the castle rising black against the sky, and I within it, lord once more. Yes, I fed myself with such visions, for without them, despair would have devoured me whole. Mina was my torment and my solace upon that road. At times I felt her love for her companions burn against me, a fire that scorched the bond we shared. At others, I felt her pity for me, yes, pity, and that wounded me deeper still. To be pitied by the one I sought to enthrone beside me was a humiliation greater than any sword thrust. Yet even her pity tethered her to me, and through that tether I endured. She was both my ruin and my anchor, the last fragile thread that kept my will from unraveling. At last, the Carpathians rose before me, dark as the wings of death. The peaks pierced the sky, crowned with snow, and the valleys yawned like the mouths of graves. My castle awaited, its stones steeped in centuries of blood and shadow. To the hunters, it was a place of horror. To me, it was home. There I would make my stand. There, upon the very soil that had birthed both my life and my damnation, the pursuit would end, whether in triumph or in dust. Thus I returned to the beginning, the circle closed. Behind me, the hunters pressed nearer. Before me, the mountains whispered of fate. And I, Count Dracula, weary yet unbroken, prepared to meet them. Not as prey, but as predator reborn. For if I must fall, I would fall as I had lived, in shadow, in defiance, in blood. Chapter 8. The Final Night. The mountains knew me. Their peaks, sharpened against the heavens, had drunk of my blood long before I had become what I am. Their valleys whispered with the cries of my soldiers, slain and forgotten, when I was yet a mortal prince. Every stone of the castle that loomed above those cliffs bore the imprint of my hand, my will, my wrath. To the world, it was a place of dread. To me, it was the cradle of my eternity. When at last I returned, borne in my coffin like a king carried to coronation, I felt the land itself breathe into me. Strength that had waned on foreign soil flooded my veins anew. The wind carried the howls of wolves as a choir. The mists curled like the arms of old lovers. And I thought, here no man can triumph over me. Not Van Helsing, not his band of would-be slayers, not even the woman who wept for my soul. Yet the hunters came, relentless. Through Mina's eyes I knew their approach, two riding hard from the west, others pressing from the east, their paths converging upon the castle as hounds upon a stag. They had pursued me across nations, across waters and storms, and now, upon the very threshold of my dominion, they closed the trap. The night of their arrival, the air was taut with destiny. I did not pace, for predators do not pace in their own lair, they wait. I sat within the great hall, where once I had feasted with mortal guests, where I had welcomed Jonathan Harker into the silken snare of my hospitality. The fire burned low, casting shadows that danced upon the walls like spectres of centuries past. In those flickering shapes, I saw my triumphs and my sins, armies crushed beneath my banner, lovers drained in midnight embrace, kingdoms rotting while I endured. Mina's presence was a wound within me. Through the bond she quivered, torn between dread and compassion. Her prayers rose like arrows, striking my soul, though she did not mean them for me. She longed for my end, yet also for my peace. I, who had never begged mercy of any man, felt the tremor of her mercy reach me across the void, and it was unbearable. The castle stirred as they came. The gates, rusted yet unyielding, echoed with the clang of battle. Wolves howled, but fell silent at the cross held high. The wind moaned through the battlements, a dirge for what was to come. And I, Count Dracula, lord of this fortress, rose to meet my fate. The clash was not of swords alone, but of wills. They entered with steel and faith, with rifles and blades and relics drenched in their god's authority. I met them with shadow and storm, with the strength of 100 years renewed. I moved through them like a wraith, striking, retreating, striking again. Jonathan's blade drew blood from me, but I laughed through the pain, for even wounded I was more than man. Seward and Morris pressed hard, their courage burning bright though their hands trembled. Van Helsing's eyes shone with relentless light, each syllable of his prayers cutting deeper than any weapon. But it was Mina who unmade me, not by steel, not by word, but by presence. Through the bond she stood within me, even as she stood among them. When I reached to summon my full fury, I felt her heart, her grief, her love for them, her sorrow for me. She did not raise a hand, but her compassion bound mine. I could not unleash the storm without also breaking what little remained of her soul, and so I faltered. They saw it, they pressed. Steel pierced my flesh, iron ripped through sinew, and holy symbols burned upon my skin. I struck back, and men fell wounded, yet still they came. It was a frenzy, a storm of blood and faith, and in that storm I felt time itself unravel. For centuries I had walked unchallenged, but in that hour, minutes cut deeper than decades. When the final blow came, it was not the strike of a hero's hand that undid me. It was inevitability. The blade sank, the stake followed, and I felt my heart, that ancient relic, shudder. The world grew white about me, not with light, but with silence. My body failed, my strength bled into the stones of the castle. I fell, not as a prince upon a throne, but as a man returning to dust. And yet, I confess, I felt release. The bond with Mina, That tortured chain of hunger and hope snapped. She gasped as though freed from drowning, and in her gasp I heard forgiveness. Her eyes, wet with tears, did not look upon me as monster in that final instant, but as man. Perhaps I imagined it. Perhaps dying men see what they crave, but I choose to believe it was truth. Thus ended my reign, not in the blaze of conquest, but in the quiet mercy of those who defied me. The hunters claimed their victory. Mina reclaimed her soul, and I, Count Dracula, sank into the silence I had once fled. Do not think it annihilation. No, the night is eternal, and though my body lies shattered, my shadow lingers. In the whispers of wolves, in the mists that curl over the Carpathians, in the tales that men tell to frighten children, I endure, for I am Dracula, and though slain, I am never gone. Epilogue. The shadow remains. They believe me gone. The hunters who pierced my flesh, who sanctified the soil and scattered my ashes to the winds, told themselves that their task was complete. Mina, weary and trembling, clung to her husband and thanked her God for deliverance. Van Helsing recorded the tale in his meticulous hand, certain that history would name him victor. The world breathed easier, thinking the night purged of its terror. But men are ever eager to believe in endings, when in truth there are none. Death is but a turning of the page, not the closing of the book. They struck down my body, yes, and broke the chains of my bond with her. They silenced my voice, stilled my heart, and thought they had undone my very being. Yet they did not reckon with what I'd become. I am no longer bound by flesh. I am whisper, I am memory, I am the hunger that creeps in dreams. When a traveller looks too long upon the shadows between the trees and feels his courage falter, it is I who linger there. When a child wakes crying in the night and swears she has seen eyes glimmering in the corner of her room, it is I who watch. When lovers steal kisses in the dark and one feels the sudden chill of breath upon the neck, it is I who breathe. The Carpathians remember me. Their winds carry my name. Their mists shape my face. The soil that drank my blood for centuries cannot forget, nor can the wolves who once bent their necks to my will. Even the stones of my castle, though shattered and defiled, murmur with my echo. The world may believe me gone, but the world is ever a poor judge of what endures. I think often of Mina, of her eyes in that final instant, glistening not with triumph, but with sorrow. Did she see in me, beneath the ruin, the man I once was? Or did she grant me mercy only in her imagination? No matter. Her compassion was the last warmth to touch me, and it burns still in the silence where I dwell. In truth, it is both torment and balm. She freed me, yet she also tethered me, for I cannot wholly vanish while memory of her lingers in me. The hunters aged, as mortals do. They told their tale, then faded into graves of their own. Van Helsing rests now beneath a stone cross, his prayers long ended. Jonathan and Mina lived their span, raising children who never knew the shadow that once coiled about their mother's soul. All of them returned to dust, and yet I remain. For I am dust that does not scatter, shadow that does not fade. Do you see, reader? Even now, though you sit in comfort, though light surrounds you, still you feel the breath of this tale. Still you glance over your shoulder at the soundless corners of the room. You wonder if the darkness behind your chair is deeper than it ought to be, if the night outside your window holds more than empty air. That is me. I am with you. I am always with you. For I am Dracula, slain, yet unforgotten, condemned, yet eternal. As long as man fears the night, as long as blood quickens in the veins, as long as death whispers at the edges of life, I remain. And when the hour is right, when faith falters and shadows thicken once more, I shall rise again.